Good afternoon. Welcome to the August 18th update on the tropics here. As always, these thoughts are mine alone, and in making decisions regarding our two systems today, please refer to the National Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service, and your local authorities for all the official information pertaining to you. I am not a meteorologist. Anyway, here we go with our two systems here. We have Hurricane Grace now over the western Caribbean here, and we have Tropical Storm Henri now rotating off to the southwest of Bermuda and continuing off to the west here. We'll talk about Henri last. We're going to talk about Grace first here. We had Recon just make a pass in here, and we can see that our system is still on the lower end of the hurricane spectrum here. This is only a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane here, but it is a hurricane, so it is a significant weather event for the northwestern or northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. And what has been trending in the recent hours of this storm's life is a more west-northwestward motion to it, a more northerly component to its motion, and so it could actually slip a little bit to the north of Cozumel. This is the island of Cozumel here, and it could actually end up making a run-in with Cancun here, rather than the earlier forecast, which brought it to the south, or generally in this region. So this could spend a little less time over the Yucatan Peninsula, and as a result, the system's core would be less disrupted by the land interaction that it is bound to have with the Yucatan Peninsula, because we are expecting a landfall regardless of the northward jump in the motion of the system. And you can see that our system has been dealing with a little bit of dry air here. If you look off to the northwest, you can see outflow boundaries expanding or running away from the system, indicating collapsing convection here. And you have a little dry slot right in here that has been evidence that dry air has gotten entrained into the circulation, and convection earlier this morning actually warmed without any signs of bursting, but we're seeing that convection is beginning to return and beginning to burst once again as the system advances off to the west-northwest and towards a landfall with the northeastern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Hurricane warnings are up for this entire stretch of coast, essentially extending from Cancun all the way south to this little lagoon here. So if we look at the water vapor loop, you can see what we're talking about with the dry air. You can see this tongue of dry air generally off to the northwest of the system and encroaching upon the system. So there is entrainment going on. You can see the tongue of dry air getting slipped into the system here. This dry air should begin to disappear as the system enters the Gulf of Mexico, because the system has continued to push back at this trough over the past few days, and this trough is beginning to fade out of existence. And so over the Bay of Campeche, it should be in a little more favorable of an environment. If we look at the GFS model, go back a little bit here, you can see what we're talking about with the system entraining dry air as it gets close to the Yucatan Peninsula here. You can see that tongue of dry air getting slipped into the system. Not a whole lot in terms of a buffer zone here for the system, but as it gets into the Bay of Campeche, you can see that that dry air tongue is a little less forceful, and so we still have a system that is in a very nice moisture bubble and favorable upper level environment at this point for intensification. So it should be intensifying all the way along its trek towards the Veracruz region of Mexico here, and you can see that the GFS strengthens this pretty significantly here as it approaches the landfall on Veracruz. So this should be able to strengthen pretty substantially here, and given the fact that we're trending towards a little less land interaction than initially thought, this could recover and strengthen for a longer period of time before it makes landfall on the Veracruz region. So if you're in the Veracruz region of Mexico, please do be preparing for this. We are only 54 to 60 hours away from landfall here, and you definitely need to be preparing for this system, and go ahead and finalize your preparations as this system comes towards you. We're not really expecting an insane system here. If we go to the National Hurricane Center forecast, you can see that they don't have a major hurricane here. We probably, on the upper end of the forecast, would experience winds of 100 miles per hour, which is a low-end Category 2 hurricane, but the system is not really expected to become a major hurricane. So this would still be bad, but it's definitely not catastrophic. So please do be preparing for this if you are in the path of this, and be prepared for mudslides and dangerous flooding as this comes inland here. This could cross into the eastern Pacific over the next after its trek over Mexico. It depends on really how fast this gets going through Mexico here, but as you can see, it's a remnant low at this point. But we won't be tracking it once it gets into the eastern Pacific. It's just a little tidbit here. If we move on to the visible loop for Tropical Storm Henri here, we've been watching Henri for the past couple of days here, and it has continually overperformed in spite of the less than favorable environmental conditions here. You can see that the system is still pretty well stacked this late afternoon here. As you can see, the sun's about to set on the system here. And you can see a couple of things. So if we look at the clouds off to the north of the system here, you can see that the cloud tops are getting pushed rather quickly out of the north, and this has been dealing with accelerating shear as it continues off to the west, and this is because it is moving right into a belt of rather strong shear here. But as you can see, the system has remained organized in the face of this shear and has continued to overperform in spite of the shear here. You can see this very strong belt of northeasterly flow impinging upon the system, and this is generally because of the upper level ridge that is currently centered over the southwestern Atlantic. And if we look at the H-Wharf model here, if we go back a little bit, you can see what we're talking about with this elongated upper level ridge here that has produced this belt of northeasterly flow upon the system. And as this traverses this belt here, you should not be expecting much in the way of strengthening, and this should be going through this area of shear for the next 24 hours as this tries to get under this upper level ridge here. And you can see this upper level ridge getting pushed by an incoming trough here centered over Michigan and Indiana here, and this should be pushing this belt of northeasterly flow off to the east, and so shortening the amount of time that this is under an unfavorable environment here. So if we continue, you can see that the system gets under the upper level anticyclone, this upper level ridge, which rather than shearing it begins to ventilate the system, especially off to the south here. You have a very nice belt of equatorward outflow here, and this is probably going to look pretty impressive once it gets under this belt, and it should begin to intensify quite a bit here as this trough moves the upper level ridge over the system rather than shearing the system, and this upper level ridge is no longer displaced and is instead ventilating the system, helping the system strengthen, and it could potentially strengthen quite a bit here as it is under these favorable upper level winds. And you can see that it is going to be under favorable upper level winds for a little while here, and you can see that the H-Wharf deepens this rather significantly here. And if we continue, hold on, my computer's acting weird. If we continue to move this forward here, you can see that it's getting picked up, and you can see a little hint of what I'm about to show you on the mid-level flow here. This trough is not moving very fast, and that's because there's a mid-level ridge that is blocking this. You can see the H-Wharf actually deepens this quite a bit. You can see 956 millibars here, but do take individual model runs with a grain of salt in terms of what their exact intensity is. Just mainly look at the environment and what the intensity of the system is overall, and show pretty much what you can take away from this particular model run is that this is a pretty strong hurricane at this point as it is moving off to the north. Now, here comes the complicated part of the forecast here. If we're looking at the GFS model, we just got this one out and I just looked at it. You can see that our system is still advancing off to the west. This is a little slower of a turn than previous model runs, and we've been kind of watching for when this is exactly going to turn. There's a lot of moving parts here. We have, of course, the trough here that is now sitting over Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia here. And you have, of course, Henri here making the gradual turn off to the north. Exactly when that turn is crucial to what impacts we see with New England, because New England has now become involved in this entangled forecast track here. This is a very difficult forecast to make, and that's because we have a ridge here centered over the Great Lakes, and this is all being translated off to the east. So we have our upper level trough here, we have Henri here, we have another trough here pushing this ridge off to the east, and models have been disagreeing on when exactly all of these features are where they need to be in order for Henri to turn into the region of New England here. And the positioning of the upper level trough over the Great Plains and the upper level ridge over the Great Lakes, and the upper level trough that is going to be moving over the mid-Atlantic at this time, and the position of Henri itself. Henri, if it continues to be stronger than forecast, would continue to be further west and take longer to turn off to the north. And if it takes too long, then we may not have to worry about it impacting New England as badly, and it could just, guide itself off to the north here, gradually off to the northeast, and probably have a brush pretty close with New England. So regardless of whether or not this actually does make a landfall here, we're dealing with what will be a storm that is becoming rather large at this point, and would likely see tropical storm force winds well outside of the center of the system. And we do definitely have an increasing possibility that the system would make a rather close brush with New England. And the Gulf Stream is what is really crucial here. I may be drawing that a little north of where the Gulf Stream actually ends. And so up to this point of the storm's life, it should be in favorable conditions for the system's continued strengthening / leveling off, and it not really is going to weaken. It's not really going to weaken while it is south of the Gulf Stream. Once it is north of the Gulf Stream, though, because the system will likely be slowing down as it makes this approach to New England here, you can see it doesn't really move a whole lot. We're talking about 84 hours here, and then now 102 hours here. Well, 108 hours here. This is a 24-hour position change. 84, 108 here. It's going from like here to here. It's not very fast, and so it has a lot of time to weaken between this jump, and has 24 hours to weaken over much cooler waters here, because cooler waters run pretty much right in this region here, this little belt of cooler water as this gets off to the north. And so this would likely weaken pretty significantly upon approach, because it will be slowing down as it runs into this blocking high here. You can see this blocking high, and it's not going to be very easy for the system to progress very quickly off to the north. And you can see this upper level low that we've been talking about here is kind of the reason that it gets flung into this blocking high. And so, but that would also prolong effects for this region. If we look at the National Hurricane Center forecast, which has made quite the jump off to the west, remember we were talking about a system that was probably going to turn like this here a couple days ago, and now we have made the sudden shift off to the west here, and now a tropical storm point here on day 5 is right off the coast of Cape Cod here. And so, but you can tell here that it slows down quite a bit. This is a 24-hour difference in position here, because 2 p.m. Sunday and 2 p.m. Monday, it doesn't move a whole lot, and so it does have time to weaken. But depending on how strong this is able to get here within this time frame would depend on how much of a cascade it has to fall down during the time between Sunday and Monday. But regardless, it would have already moved a lot of water and moved a lot of surge with the system, regardless of how much it weakens, because even though it has a lot of time to weaken, the winds would be the only thing that really comes down. And if it continues to slow down here, as the GFS does depict, there would also be a lot of rain. And so, again, we have a lot of time between now and whenever the system begins to impact the coasts. But if you're in the New England area, anywhere along the coast, really from northeastern Maine all the way down to the mid-Atlantic, and even, I would say, even to the Chesapeake here, you do need to be preparing for this system and potential impacts. And if you are in a surge zone, you do definitely need to be heeding the warnings of your local officials here, as this could bring a lot of surge with it. That's typical of systems that get to the higher latitudes. They become larger and move a lot of water with them. And so, as Henri continues its trek off to the generally off to the west here, please do be watching this very sensitive forecast and pay attention to the National Hurricane Center for all the latest information pertaining to your area and pertaining to Henri. That's all I got for now. Stay safe and thanks for watching.